welcome to another episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish for Cloud Security Podcast. This month is in support of Cloud Native and Cloud Native KubeCon that's running next month in Valencia, Spain. If you're there, definitely check them out. Or at least if you're not there, definitely sign up for the virtual attendee event. And it's going to be a jam-packed event. And today is the last episode for Cloud Native Month. And for this, I have someone special. I know I missed out on this for the last weekend, so thankfully I'm back in Melbourne now, and I don't have to miss a flight for this. So I am definitely gonna make sure you guys have requested this topic for a long time, and I have someone special to talk about this as well. So let's put the music on, and let's get the show on the road. Hey, Or, welcome.
Hi, welcome.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Currently in New York, but doing really
That's pretty
good.
awesome, man. At least I'm glad you didn't have to wake up the ridiculous hour as well. So I'm glad it's only 6 p.m. for you. I appreciate that. So for people who may not know you, because I've known you and I've spoken to you for a while, can you tell us a bit about yourself as well as I'm gonna dive straight into it. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your journey to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Or. I'm 35 years old, currently the CTO and the co-founder at Lightspan, a cloud security startup from Israel. And I think a bit differently from a lot of other Israeli cybersecurity entrepreneurs. I wasn't, in the intelligence or A200. My military service was a bit different. I was in the Navy, was a submariner, nothing close to technology. So that's where I started. And after 4.5 years, I think I sort of left, and then I started my journey inside, the cybersecurity technology, starting from really early days in NOC engineering and IT, and quickly transitioned into security field, really by accident. Just Someone just picked me. My manager said, like, you should start handling our firewalls, and then from there, I quickly did lots of roles in the Israeli security agency for cybersecurity. Sort of 8 years, led few teams from developing internal security solutions and developing more of embedded security stuff.
Yeah.
Then after 8 years, I left and joined an Israeli automotive cybersecurity company. That's where I met Vladi, my partner. He's the CEO today, doing lots of projects, mainly for connected car platforms. So it's like the cloud side of connected vehicles. And after a year, I both left and started Lightspeed. That's like quickly about me.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And out of curiosity, considering this is Cloud Native Month, and we kind of have, it's funny, we were just offline talking about Kubernetes and the popularity Kubernetes has. Just to level the playing field for people, what is Kubernetes for you, and what do you see it as? Like, why do you see it's getting so popular? What are people using it for?
Yeah. So I think maybe for me today, it's like I think the standard for running maybe workloads in the cloud today. I would be curious, a bit cautious about this because others are maybe on serverless environments or still on old legacy workloads. But I think today, um, that's the most common standard to run workloads in the cloud, I would say. Generally, for everyone starting today, so Kubernetes is a container orchestration platform, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
You can think of it as a set of controllers and services that orchestrate and sort of automates the entire operation and of the platform and the infrastructure tasks that we were used to do by ourselves in the past, or running scripts that does this. So, for example, auto scaling and auto healing, things that we were used to take care of our own, is taken care of automatically today in Kubernetes, where we have seamless deployments of our applications, automatic load balancing and discovery for our services. Um, I think also in terms of configuration, so a really easy way to manage our config and secrets for our applications. Everything sort of built in right there in Kubernetes, and everything could also be sort of declared right from the beginning as part of the infrastructure. So we're not just declaring how our application is running, but where we store our configurations and how it's scaled and how it's replicated and what storage does it use, or everything sort of declared in one easy YAML file. Everything I think in Kubernetes is sort of managed by an API that is running in the control plane. So we have the control plane in Kubernetes, and we have the workers which are running our workloads. And the control plane is where all the controllers and the services are running to manage the workloads in our applications.
Mm-hmm.
And those workloads are running on worker nodes, those are actually the virtual machines or the servers that are hosting all our applications. Every application is called a pod, which can hold one or more containers. So, for example, if my web application can include like a WordPress container and a MySQL container, then combining them together to an application would be called a pod, and that can be deployed on each worker or can be deployed on one of them. Depends on
All
the
right.
deployment type. Yeah.
So to your point, then it's the well, I guess it's funny, I said this yesterday as well, but it's almost like a orchestration of a predefined application is another way to define it. Like I think, but using containers and pods and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and what's the difference between the whole cloud managed Kubernetes and like you know how a lot of people seem to have gone down the traditional path of we're gonna do a self-managed one. Why did people go down the self-managed path in the first place? Why not just go for cloud managed? So what's the difference, first of all?
Yeah, so the difference first is on a managed Kubernetes, basically the cloud service provider has another layer of abstraction for us. While the entire control plane is managed by the cloud service provider. So we don't really have access to the control plane. We can communicate with it, we can configure it, but it's basically running by the cloud service provider. And it saves us a lot of time for deploying the control plane and configuring it from this first place.
Yep.
I think today within a few clicks you can get a Kubernetes cluster running on every cloud service provider, set with predefined rules and versions and security patches and rolling updates, whatever we need. While on our self-managed, we have to do everything by ourselves.
Doesn't sound like a great place.
And that's tough. I mean, that's tough for people that started with Kubernetes years ago. They were doing this by themselves before. Managed Kubernetes became as mature as it is today on cloud service providers.
Yeah.
And it's tough. I mean, it takes a lot of DevOps effort and a lot of work to build this and maintain this efficiently.
Yeah.
So I would say those are the main differences.
Right.
Yeah.
And to your point, then, if sounds like cloud managed one, sorry, the managed ones should have been the first preference for a lot of people, or should be the first preference for a lot of people at the moment. Does the shared responsibility kind of change in what used to be the traditional Kubernetes versus what the cloud managed version is?
Yeah, it definitely changed. I would say that I think today for most consumers, a managed Kubernetes has way more advantages than managing the cluster by ourselves. As the cloud service providers are more mature in this set of features they provide and the stability, the shared responsibility in this case is sort of giving them another piece of the infrastructure to manage. So it's not just the underlying infrastructure, but also part of the Kubernetes infrastructure, which is the control plane. So depends on the different vendors, but some of them are already updating, part of the nodes and doing some security patches for us. And they are managing the entire control plane. So, if your control plane is now crashing or the API, they have those automated ways of restarting it and making sure it's more resilient, which takes more responsibility to them in this case.
Right. And so, okay, so if the managed services make sense, then I guess is there a gap here? That's that's what's making people go that, hey, I've got EKS. I don't know. I actually don't know. So is there much difference between EKS and AKS and GKE and stuff? Like what's the obvious, I don't know, one or two differences that you see straight away between the Kubernetes offering from the cloud service provider?
So I would say that, I mean, it's hard to really pinpoint like very specific ones, but I think since Kubernetes started from Google, their offering is more mature today. Like GKE is, I think, more mature than the others.
Yeah.
And I don't see a big gaps between, them. 80%, let's say, of the requirements today would probably be the same. GKE is super easy to deploy, very friendly to manage. It has automatic upgrades for both the control plane and the worker nodes, rather
Yeah.
than on EKS, let's say EKS, it's the AWS version of it. You still have to do the working nodes updates by yourself. It doesn't done automatically.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and between AKS, the Azure version, or is that AKE
Yeah.
or AKS?
Yeah. AKS.
Yeah,
So
all the names keep running into each other, man. So what's with the AKS then?
So AKS I think today has more native integrations with Azure policies or Active Directory. So if you're coming from sort of an Azure shop and more IT led, where you came from the on-prem with everything based on Active Directory, that's more seamless. It's like out of the box, you get everything based on Active Directory, super easy. If that's where you started your journey to Kubernetes, like going from on-prem workloads into the cloud, and Azure, that's your shop, and everything is based on Azure policies or Active Directory. That's definitely there.
All right. And so, out of curiosity, it sounds like obviously people may still have to make a choice between, hey, whether I do want to go for the most updated GKE version or manage my updates on Amazon to what you were saying, or maybe come from an IT push. Out of curiosity, how does that scale in terms of, say, if I start today on EKS, and I'm assuming, I don't think you would have noticed a pattern between this, more of GKE versus more of AKS or more of EKS, but is there actually a pattern of adoption that you've noticed so far in terms of one over the other?
So at least I see a lot of movements towards GKE and EKS today. That's what at least I see
Yeah.
the market. And I think specifically some reasons are because security is taken care of by the CS cloud service providers in this case.
Yeah.
That's part of the motion and the stuff that we're seeing. I think developers more oriented. Like, if you're in AWS, then EKS, of course, that's the easy. And if you need more, I think, integrations to other services in the cloud, so AWS is more rich there. But if
Okay.
most of your, let's say, ecosystem for your applications is everything running Kubernetes, then I guess GKE would be also an amazing choice there. We don't need lots of external stuff in the cloud service infrastructure.
All right. So I guess because I'm imagining a typical build, how when people deploy Kubernetes, they talk about, hey, I need to do etcd, I need to configure my API server, I need to do, I don't know, 10 different things before. To what you were saying, the state is predefined for exactly what you want, and the Kubernetes cluster is managed like by the admin. In terms of applications that are being built, would they be like, I think from a security perspective, we've got a lot of security architects who may be listening to this as well. From their perspective, what are they looking for in those kind of builds from a security perspective? What do you think is already covered, but what is not covered specifically that they should be looking out for?
So I don't think a lot is covered. I'll be, honestly here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of predefined configurations and rules where you can set, but I would say, for startups or anyone that secures, Kubernetes clusters from the beginning, take the time for planning it. Test the different tools you want to use, and in this case, there's a great open source and checklist that Jonathan Rao, our CISO, did for deploying a security case. This is the one we're using and other companies are using, which just turns on by default, encryption at rest and logging for all the API in Kubernetes. And also installs by default, Falco, which is a great runtime protection. And other rules. You don't have to use this also to deploy your AKS clusters or just for EKS, but you can use this checklist also when you are deploying Kubernetes, even on Google Cloud or Azure, to just see like that's the basic stuff that I need, my Kubernetes cluster to have when I'm deploying it in terms of security. So I think that's a great reference to use when doing this. It's a great resource, even just as a checklist. So it's cool. Like I think, it's on our GitHub. You can see this. It's called ECE. Great project. That would be the basic I would start off with.
With cloud native one, cloud managed Kubernetes.
Yeah. It's currently for EKS. We plan to do support for Azure and GCP in the future, but the checklist there is valid for all of them as a checklist to get. Yeah.
So maybe another way to put this is, I've got a question here from David as well. When securing Kubernetes clusters, what are the pros and cons of choosing the cloud platform native security policy management versus a third-party CSPM tool?
Okay, so I think there's in terms of the security policy management. I haven't seen many of great security tools. Usually it's just a checklist, whether it's CIS benchmark or running basic posture stuff, which is okay, but it doesn't cover a lot of stuff. It doesn't cover the connectivity between the Kubernetes cluster to the infrastructure side. Like, for example, do I have an over-permissive IAM roles attached to my pods? Are my hosts running in a secure way? And a lot of CSPMs today are able to, like mostly next generation CSPMs, but are able to correlate issues that are between those two layers, and it's super important because just looking on Kubernetes, it's not enough today. This is one thing. The second is, I would say, the ability to continuously write your own policies and sort of taking them into the workflow for your organization. So from the platform, the third-party CSPM, right into a Jira ticket or ServiceNow or any whatever the workflow is, and integrating with different API and also with different, I would say, security features in the product. So the ability to correlate posture management issues within Kubernetes with the vulnerabilities of running applications. That's super important. Otherwise, you can get tons of alerts without context. We mentioned the context a bit earlier, but that's part of it. And the ability for third-party security to correlate, vulnerabilities with the posture management and security policies and the exposure of the entire infrastructure is super critical for, at least from my opinion, in this case.
Yep. I think probably one more thing to add there is also a scale of it as well, right? Because I think a lot of examples that I hear quite often is the fact that if you have one Kubernetes, like, I don't know, one Kubernetes cluster that you're managing, the policies and the policy management within a cloud provider is probably enough. But the moment you start having multiple Kubernetes clusters and you start scaling that, and I think nowadays the challenge of Kubernetes clusters is not enough to say, I only have one Kubernetes cluster. I may have 20 Kubernetes clusters running in my AWS account, another 5 in GKE in Google Cloud. How do I manage all of them together? I think that's kind of where at least I have been able to personally find value in the whole third-party CSPM space, because it's like Amazon is never going to, at least at the moment, I don't know if they might announce it, reinforce or reinvent. They don't have like a single layer to manage all of it, at least at their end. But I think, or maybe, I don't know if GKE does that. I haven't done much work in GKE, but I think that's kind of where I definitely find that shines. He's got a follow-up as well. What are your thoughts on policy as code?
So I think it's a great addition to it. I think that, at least we are also using OPA, the Open Policy Agent, by ourselves. That's awesome. Whether if you're using it as a sort of a passive, like detecting issues before they're being deployed, or you're over your infrastructure as code, or you're using this as an admission controller in Kubernetes to block certain things from happening before they're running in Kubernetes. So we're definitely embracing this. And you mentioned, the scale. So at least today in our company, we have, I think, 5 or 6 different Kubernetes clusters, and
Wow.
it's easier for us. And we're using OPA constantly as a policy of code to enforce different stuff, and we're allowing even others to write their own policies,
Yep.
and it's super helpful. And I think also policies code is really scalable because you can route your policy once and apply this to clusters running, whether it's in AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure, and it should be the same while they're treating Kubernetes assets the same.
Ah, sweet. Thanks for sharing that. Hopefully that answered your question, David, but feel free to ask a follow-up, man. Thanks for that great question, man. Continuing with this then, I think maybe it's a good segue into the next question that I wanted to ask as well. We spoke about the difference between the different cloud-provided Kubernetes clusters and how our responsibility kind of changes between them. For a startup that may be listening to this as well, I think we spoke about from a security perspective, they need to think about some of the basic foundational pieces still, like you mentioned, overtly permissive IAM roles in an AKS context, something similar in GKE. From an application that may just be one cluster and maybe another startup like yours, I guess, like as Lightspin was, they're trying to build this. What do you see as some of the security components for Kubernetes that they should be looking at closely to manage them? Is any thoughts on that so they can kind of learn from what you guys may have learned as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I think in this case, I would, go and not just, click the next when deploying a new Kubernetes cluster, but just looking on the documentation really and see what are all those boxes when you usually don't tick or the cloud service provider doesn't tick for you. We make sure, at least when we started our journey, to make sure on day one all the secrets that our application uses is in a vault, is stored somewhere else, and everything is declared from the beginning.
Yeah.
We defined everything as an infrastructure as code in our place. It's like, hey, we have Helm files that deploys the applications, and we have Terraforms that deploys the cluster itself. And it's very helpful because whether you're going to touch your security, next phase more carefully, you can audit everything in one place. And if you have, a drift between what you have in infrastructure as code and the manual stuff that you did, then putting security together is going to be much more harder. Although it seems odd to enable all the logging in the first place, I would recommend doing this because you never know when there's going to be an incident, or you have to investigate something, and then you need the logs, and then you would say, "Oh, why I didn't enable this?" So there's a cost to this, of course, but I would enable this in the first place, and even choose the way the nodes are running. Like in this case, to make it on the most secure way, and also the everything that relates to identity. The easiest part, and I guess you know this also, is giving an admin for everyone. Yeah, you need this, just be an admin, and that's hard. I know managing also role-based access control in Kubernetes is a bit tough, but those are the stuff that I would invest in first place. That would save a lot of time when doing auditing or security or pen testing, or even when connecting your first CSPM or KSPM, whether it's Kubernetes, to and then get tons of findings. So those are the stuff that I would start in the beginning. It's not going into runtime protection in the beginning, or CV scanning for everything and stuff like this, but should make things more easier in the future.
And to your point, then, as they may be starting to scale and they would have heard what you've said, some people may have already followed the path as well, and they've gone, okay, I've made sure not everyone is a root user, not everyone is an admin. I have done the basic sanity pieces of at least managing one cluster of my Kubernetes in deployment. What happens when you start scaling to 2, 3, 4? Like how does security scale? Because you kind of mentioned something really interesting about turning on logging as well. That's probably, I imagine the scale of it changes as you kind of grow. So what do you see would change from a security perspective when you scale from multiple clusters, I guess? What was the challenges that you came across?
So centralized logging, as you mentioned. So in the beginning, of course, you use the native cloud service. If you use the cloud service provider managed Kubernetes, then everything is like on its own logging place, whether it's
CloudWatch or one of those.
CloudWatch or the application insights in Azure. So then putting everything on a centralized place is something important, I think. Second phase is exactly, I think, what they've asked about is about policies code. So great, we have all the clusters, but if we want to prevent more advanced things from happening in our production, or at least get insights about what's currently running in production, so having admission controllers that would allow us to see what's going inside, runtime. What issues do we have, or what sort of authorization workflows we have that might, affect our clusters? That's, I guess, the interesting part. And also going inside network policies. So we haven't touched network policies before because I think it's still not very mature in Kubernetes to manage this by your own if you're not running any service mesh or any kind of higher abstraction level for networking. But then this would be the place to start, hardening your network policies and make sure not every pod can communicate with everyone. It's like starting making things more strict. This would probably be the next things I would tackle when starting scaling Kubernetes. So like one place to store my policies in code and make sure they're enforced on the different clusters. Make sure I have a centralized logging, and then making sure whether I choose the proper networking solution or service mesh that I have the policies also as part of my policies code for the networking for the different environments. I guess dev and test are different sometimes from production.
Yeah, and to your point, then as you kind of scale from being a one cluster company to maybe 3 and 4 cluster or maybe even larger, you may be logging is done by CloudWatch or whatever the equivalent is in the cloud managed provider. Do you see, I guess from a challenge perspective, would there be like, I've done the right things, I've deployed it, I'm centralizing, putting it in a central place? I'm assuming you meant some kind of a seam, or is there a better way? I feel like there's a lot of data these days. It's like a security data lake, or what's your thoughts there on the whole seam piece as well? Where are you centralizing this into?
So in the beginning, I guess we use also we use the same observability platform we use for the developers with all the logging, same as for SIEM in the moment.
Yeah.
But we are looking on jumping straight from our current monitoring, application monitoring and observability directly into security data. Like that's where Jonathan, our CISO, is pushing this ahead, taking all the data into there, and from there working on the data. So it's a different, aspect to it. It's a different angle to it. It requires more data engineering skills, but I think there's enough tools today and solutions to support this. But this is where we are. This is where we are targeting or aiming our efforts to. So just directly from using the built-in observability and application monitoring tools for logging directly into security data. Like I think it's I wouldn't say it's like the next generation SIEM for it, but it's definitely a place where we think security engineers should be in. That's the place where you can really benefit from security. So that's my take on this. It's still early for us even on this kind of where we're thinking of this, but this way where I would go.
Yeah, and well, I think it's very funny because we had someone from Snowflake, Omar, ages ago, talk about security data lake and how a lot of the big people, I guess the Netflix of the world, they all have data engineers in the security team as well, because they all realize ultimately it comes down to the data. It doesn't really matter. And talking about data from a monitoring perspective as well, what are some of the scenarios that people are really looking for in Kubernetes? Is there like a CIS benchmark, or what are they trying to monitor? Because I think you kind of mentioned in the beginning about the context for why is it relevant, or why is CVE relevant, and all of this. does the CVE has context in Kubernetes? I guess it's still a container running, so you probably still have a CVE required at that point in time.
Yeah. So first, I mean, the monitoring. So yeah, a lot of people are looking for the basics: CIS benchmark. Where's my issue? Who's privileged? Who has access? Root admins. Which containers are running with over permissive access or networking access? And on top of it, the idea of context is that it's easy today. Like if you connect any vulnerability management or scanning tool to most of the running containers today, you would get thousands of CVs, and you can't really track by your own which of my containers run on each pod and which pod is public to the internet. It's hard. I mean, like you would get thousands of alerts, or there's tons of YAMLs to declare and go through. And when asking the question of, let's say, do I have an exploitable CVE or a CVE which is exposed on a port, which is also part of my ingress controller, I mean, the load balancer in Kubernetes, and this is also exposed by my cloud service provider to the internet on an external load balancer, then this is where the most interesting part is happening. And this really is where you would need your first monitoring in terms of, how do I reduce the attack surface on my Kubernetes cluster? Just running vulnerability scan would trigger tons of alerts. Just running benchmarks and the default policies would probably get a lot of alerts. Even by the default pods running by the cloud service provider. So every managed Kubernetes has its own pods and containers that the cloud service providers is pushing agents for doing his internal stuff, and those sometimes create alerts by itself.
All right.
Yeah. I can tell you that when we're running, Falco by default on all cloud service providers, you would see Falco triggering tons of alerts on all the default ones. And this is stuff that when we are starting to monitor and looking on clusters are things that we should exclude, things that maybe we should be aware of their risk, because sometimes we think that the cloud service provider is safe, and we know it's not. So those are the stuff we're also looking to monitor besides this.
Right. So to your point, then I agree with you on the fact that over the past few months of people discovering, I think Lightspin also had a few discoveries as well within the AWS space as well. So I think I definitely agree on the fact that there's definitely some holes left unpatched on cloud service providers that people are trying to recognize more often now. Somehow it seems like the last few months, everyone's kind of found at least one in each one of those. So maybe another way to ask this question is also the fact that, okay, I've done a cloud managed Kubernetes cluster to what you said. If I have one, I'm making sure that at least logging is there so I can make sure that I see what needs to be done. If I'm scaling out, I start doing policy as code, where whether it's OPA or some other way. You mentioned service mesh as well. Do you reckon for network policy, is service some kind of a service mesh actually a requirement, or does the basic network policy provided by the cloud managed provider is enough in a Kubernetes cluster, or it would not have the context?
So it should be enough for the beginning. The basic network policies, like it's sort of configuring a network firewall rules, pretty the same. Has some limitations there for denying certain rules, but should be enough for the basics. But on large scale clusters with lots of applications where you're not sure which communicating with each, then service mesh is really helpful in this case, and then you can just enforce your network policies right there, much easier.
Yeah.
In this case, yeah.
And to your point, what about the team skill set at this point in time as well? Because it already sounds like the team needs to know cloud, they need to know Kubernetes, they also need to know OPA, policy code. Like what kind of skill sets are people looking for in their teams just to manage Kubernetes security?
Wow, yeah, that's tough. Um, so I would say that looking on Kubernetes, it's like an entire cloud within your cloud. Okay, it's sort of where it goes. Huge ecosystem, lots of startups doing all different types where you can see on the cloud, in the same as Kubernetes, like storage solutions and encryption solutions and service mesh and security, everything. So I think I would start by, first the Kubernetes documentation is really awesome. There's lots of snippets and and examples of how to run stuff. And I would recommend also people starting by building and breaking their own Kubernetes clusters. That's great. I mean, I've built few or breakthrough. I mean, that's where you really learn, and starting also with the self-managed, not the
All right.
because otherwise you won't have the understanding of how the control plane runs, what's run there, how the API is managed, how it's configured. On most, I think, managed Kubernetes clusters, or maybe everyone today, you can't really get the, let's say, the properties of the command line running the API server, and that's an issue because like you can't really understand all the parameters and what's possible and what not. And when you're doing this by yourself, you'll get lots of information about how it really runs on the cloud service provider side.
Yeah.
So I would say documentation and starting with your own Kubernetes cluster. Kops is a really great way to start with. And then I would go, with I think the most common patterns for using Kubernetes today. Once you get this in place, then learning, Terraform and Helm for infrastructure as code, OPA for policies code are awesome. There are some also great open source projects like Gatekeeper for OPA, which allows us to um, enforce part of the policies that we want. So it's great to do this. And lots of demos and walkthroughs of those kind of stuff. There's lots of open sources where you can learn about different types of patterns for Kubernetes.
Yeah.
I guess that's how we started our journey there.
Oh, perfect. No, thanks for sharing that, man. I appreciate that. And I think that's kind of like towards the tail end of what we kind of had questions as well. So thanks, David, for the question that you had as well. So now we can probably switch gears into some more of a fun question. I've got 3 fun questions for you. And just to get to know you a bit more than the technical aspect of who Or is, I guess. The first one being, what do you spend most time on when you're not working on the whole CSPM, KSPM,
Wow.
Kubernetes? What's your favorite pastime?
Okay. So I would say trying mostly, family and kids because
Oh,
that's
yeah.
tough. It's hard. It's hard, being an entrepreneur in the startup. So, but that's where I try. Other than this, it's listen to music, trying to on the way to work, train back and forth, on flights, walking with my dog. So that's that's where I try
Oh,
to
nice.
spend some of the time. Yeah.
Oh, fair enough. That's a good way to do that as well. What's something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
Sorry again.
What is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
Uh, wow, hard question. Let me think of this.
Yeah, I think so. Some people maybe have I guess, talk about families or things they've done, which they may have done in the past, I guess. But yeah, it's a tough one to kind of come up with suddenly. But that's why I've got that question there because it brings out the hidden gems of people.
um, yeah, definitely. Gotta think of it. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's completely fine. I mean, I think maybe your family. Maybe you can come back to that one then, if you like. The last one is, what is your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share?
Hmm. Okay. So favorite one, cuisine. I guess it's Italian. That's my favorite
Oh,
one.
nice. Yeah.
There's tons of great Italian restaurants in Israel. A few that I really like, especially in Tel Aviv.
Oh, nice.
But everywhere I'm trying to be, I'm usually looking for Italian restaurants. There's one specifically where I was in Italy, in Modena, that served like a really original, from the place cuisine, which is more of a, I think more meat in the in the dishes rather than other places in Italy, and I really like this. So it's
All right. I didn't
yeah.
realize there was like, so is there a difference between how pasta is served between different parts of Italy as well?
Yeah, so this is what I also discovered while doing a huge project there for Ferrari. I was spending a lot of time in Modena, and
Yeah.
actually their cuisine is quite different from what you see in Rome or Naples.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, they usually have more meat there. So just like pure meat dishes where I've eaten there, different from the general pizzas and pasta stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's fairly more
Whoa.
interesting. Yeah.
That's I'm gonna check that out in Moderna when I go there next, I guess, whenever that is. But you're in New York as well, so definitely I'm pretty sure you'll find a lot more Italian places to try out there. What I might do is I might circle back on the whole the thing that you're proud of, and maybe put this as a note in the blog. But if, for people who may be interested to hear more about what you do and maybe your Lightspin as well, where can they reach out to you?
So first on website, LinkedIn, everything works. Our blogs are awesome. I mean, most of them are technical stuff, whether it's from our research side or from Jonathan, our CISO, or from even part of the engineering or writing blogs. So our DevOps write blogs. So it's I would say directly in LinkedIn, reach out to us, whether it's me or the other team members. Everyone are super happy to speak about the cloud security community and what issues they have and what are the complex scenarios they're tackling with and what are trying to solve in cloud security. So uh, that's where we like to speak about, to like to help and contribute there.
Sounds good. And you're more active on LinkedIn, is that right? Or Twitter? Where can people reach out to you?
To me, usually LinkedIn. LinkedIn, that's what
LinkedIn it
I'm
is. Right.
mostly active. Yeah.
I'll, I'll make sure I put the links for that on the show notes as well. But thank you so much for just spending time with us, man. I really appreciate that, and hope everyone else who was listening in and had some value as well from this. But that was the last episode for Cloud Native Month for us. And EL just mentioned plenty of free tools. Thanks for that,
Yeah.
EL. And yeah, I think it'll be pretty awesome to kind of hear more about this from you guys in the future as to what you guys find in Kubernetes as well. So thank you so much. And I know we kind of missed out on last time, but finally got the episode through. Like yes. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm grateful for you took out the time again. And for everyone else, we are starting with Azure security next month. So we're gonna talk about that next weekend. So thanks so much for your time, and thank you for your time as well. Or I'll see
Thank,
everyone else soon. See ya.
thank
Peace.
you very much. Bye.